and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. Our podcast features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to quality early learning and care, with a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. I'm Maura Corbett, and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. In this series of the podcast, we've been looking at the area of wellbeing. As we know, Ashter's theme of wellbeing is all about children being happy and healthy. So in this series, we're looking at all aspects of being happy and healthy. And in this episode, we're taking a look at the area of infant and toddler mental health and how this impacts on children's wellbeing. So my guest for this episode is Catherine Maguire. Catherine is a clinical psychologist and infant mental health specialist, and she has worked throughout her career in bringing awareness to the field of infant and childhood mental health right across the lifespan. She's based in the Parent and Infant Unit at Childhood Matters in Cork. Catherine, you're really welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you, Maura. A real pleasure to be here with you and with Early Childhood Ireland. Thank you for having me.
So, Catherine, can we look first at, what the term infant and toddler mental health covers? I know from, a lot of our members in Early Childhood Ireland wouldn't provide services for too many children under one because of increased maternity leave and so on. So a lot of that infant stage is maybe provided at home, but there are some babies in settings, and children can start to attend settings from maybe 9-10 months up. So, the importance of relationships at those early stages and what the term infant and toddler mental health covers in this context.
Yeah, absolutely. We describe it really from the definition that we've all had from 0 to 3, which is really has given us a very broad definition. And they talk about the young child's developing capacity to experience, to express and to explore its environment and its capacity to learn. And it sees the infant and the young child doing that in the context of its family, its caregiving environment, and the broader environment that the child lives in. I suppose it really it refers to how a child develops socially and emotionally, and especially from the period of conception to 3. So you can see the child is developing in the context of its family, of its parents and caregivers and its siblings, the community in which it's growing up in. So immediately after the family, maybe the extended family, the grandparents, aunts and uncles, the broader family, and thereafter moving into the caregiving environment of the creche, the preschool, and the playgroups, and that world of caregiving that's just outside the home. And of course, taken into context the cultural background of the child and the cultural setting from which it's coming from. So in all of that, it's learning to express, to regulate, and to begin to form relationships and to explore the environment. So it's synonymous with how early social and emotional development takes place. So it's a very broad definition, and I suppose as we describe it, you can see the variety of people that are involved in it, particularly the role of parents and relationships, and the broader facilitating environment. And little wonder that we have that African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child or to rear a child.
And in the middle of all of that, it's, I suppose, is it trying to find a balance between all those multiplicity of relationships that a child is encountering with the need for consistency and, that kind of idea I like of, Bowlby talked about the kind of safe haven and the that security and the consistency, so that you're managing that the child knows that they're loved and held by the village, but equally that they know who the kind of key caregivers are at home and in a setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really key component, that implicit or implied in all of this is the whole world of relationships and the nature and the quality of these relationships. And we often say, development happens in the context of the relationships. So babies are born hardwired, ready to learn and ready to establish a relationship. And not only that, they're expecting that there will be a relationship ready to meet itself when it arrives. So unless the baby has had some prenatal or birth issues and has to be rushed off to in the intensive care or the neonatal unit, but babies from the minute they're born, they're ready to engage. So the context of relationships is absolutely pivotal, and the nature and the quality of them is really, really important. And as you said, there are key pieces in that they're predictable, that they're consistent, and they're nurturing. And that's especially important across all of the caregiving environments that the baby and the young child is going to grow up in, starting with the parent and the caregiving environment, and that need for one good other. So I think that's important, that sometimes because of the makeup of families, it's not always a two-parent family, but certainly we want one consistent other. And that nature and the quality and the predictability and the consistency following that baby through all its early caregiving experiences. So little wonder then that we have so much emphasis on the early childhood environment and the transition then from the parenting environment out into the early years.
And the importance of building a relationship with the parents as well as with the child.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Which I suppose was, that was difficult to do maybe over the past 2 years when early learning and care settings reopened. But, because of COVID, parents weren't able to enter buildings. So building the relationship had to be worked on that little bit more remotely, which was quite difficult, but very important for the development of the child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I suppose I'll talk about her at different intervals, but Alicia Lieberman has a wonderful textbook, The Emotional Life of the Toddler. And I would say every home and every early years environment would love to have that book. She is one of the greatest advocates of early childhood and has really, I suppose, been credited with giving voice to the world of the child. But she speaks about that whole area of relationships, and particularly in relation to the relationship between the parenting environment and the preschool environment. And she talks about it's really important that what happens, the experience of what happens the baby or the toddler in the caregiving environment is pivotal, and how the relationship between the caregiving environment and the caregivers in that environment. So in other words, the parent and the preschool environment, the teacher, the creche, that's pivotal, because the child is going to really sense what that's like, and it's going to mirror back just how does mom or dad or my caregiver feel about how I am when I'm going in and how I'm leaving, because they too have to make that separation from their parent, and they're really are so sensory and so aware, they're going to pick up any nuances in those transitions between the caregiver and the parent as well. So the caregiving environment relationship with the parenting environment relationship is a very important one.
I suppose, we've talked a little bit about babies and the transition and starting that relationship, and that kind of what I sometimes call that triangle with, the parents, the educators in the setting, and the baby, and that it's all kind of working and meshing together. When we were chatting before recording, you used that term, the world is my oyster toddler. So, at that stage, children want to be independent, they're seeing themselves as individual, and still they need that security and the safe haven. So, how do you support the mental health of the toddler who is, kind of striving for their own autonomy, but not needing and not desiring to be, kind of left fend for themselves too much from an emotional point of view?
Yeah, I suppose it's an amazing period of development, toddler, and I found myself thinking, where does this word toddler come from? And I had to go and find it, and I noticed that it's a word that's been in use from the late 1700s, and it's the Scottish word to toddle. You probably know this instinctively, but I was fascinating. I did wonder if it had an association with toddle. And it really speaks about that 12 to 18 months, that between the 12 to 24 months, I suppose, when the child is really developing mobility. But in that time, once the child becomes mobile and has established that sense that I can take steps and I can find my way around, then the world becomes such an interesting place, and their motivation and their drive, as Alicia Lieberman would say, is absolutely exhilarating. So the parent is faced with that really interesting kind of challenge to support that exploration, but also to protect, because the world is such an interesting place, and being secure and keeping the toddler safe is important. So I suppose the same parameters for the baby are in the baby's early years are still important for the toddler, that the predictable, secure, nurturing environment is still really the key, because what's happening in this period of the second year of life is really the coming to establish the importance of the secure base, that the young child is beginning to get a sense of his inner world is predictable and consistent, and that when there are feelings of threat or distress, that there is a safe place or a safe haven to go to. So very often you see, particularly in that first 12 to 24 months, or that first 12 to 18 months, exploration is very strong and very real, but the toddler will want to come back to its caregiver to check out, and particularly if there's any moments of fear or distress. So it comes back to the bosom of the parent, or to the parent's lap, or to the parent's knee, just to check, and then ready to go again and ready to explore. So in that kind of consistent, predictable environment, the toddler is really getting a sense of, me, myself, and I, getting a sense of its inner self, but happening all the time in the context of a felt experience that there is somebody bigger, stronger, wiser, my parent, my mum, my dad, my caregiver, really there, that understands who I am and how I feel. And I think the other thing that's happening in this period of toddlerhood is, very often in this mid-toddler stage, toddlers can often have lots of fear. You can get fears and anxiety. These are very natural occurrences in toddlerhood. The fear of losing the parent, the fear of if something happens, that will my mom or my dad be very cross with me? Will I lose the relationship? But there are internal fears of insecurity, and these happen. These happen as part of the stage of development. So it's why when there's upset, and when there's fussy moments, or particularly when there's a meltdown, that repair happens pretty quickly, and that the toddler is reassured that, yes, you had a little fall, and mom didn't want you to go there, dad didn't want you to climb, but it's okay. Mom is here to soothe you and to protect you and to help you to understand. And you can see how much the toddler's world becomes so happy and so bright and so delighted. And the reason why that parent-child interaction is so important at this period, because if another aspect of development that's happening here is the whole area of internal regulation, internal emotional regulation. And we often say that, babies and toddlers can't manage these really fussy moments or these big emotions on their own. And they are very, very dependent, particularly up to almost the end of the preschool years, the 3.5 to 4, to need that parent to come and to help them make sense of the different emotional states that they're feeling, so that the child gets almost like a language or a currency of understanding what it's thinking and feeling. And it does that by how the parent really either marks up or marks down the emotional state that the child is feeling. So if the child is maybe very low key, the parent may use facial expression, raised eyebrows, raised voice a little bit to help say, what's the matter? Mom sees you're very upset. Or if the child is very, very angry and is very, loud and distressed, then the parent will equally use a facial expression that denotes upset or anger, but marks down the tone in a way that the toddler sees on the parent's face the distressed, angry feeling, but knows that it's not at the same pitch as what it's feeling itself. And the parent then explains, I can see you're angry, I can see you're cross. So the parent then labeling emotions and feelings. And over time, this labeling of emotions and feeling helps young toddlers to know what these inner states are, and gives them, I think, confidence about what they're feeling, so that when they really get to the preschool years and where there's much more emotional displays, they're more able to name what the emotional state is rather than be at the mercy of the behavior of it, if that makes sense.
I always like that idea of the adult helping the child to contain those big emotions, so that they, in the early stages when the emotions threaten to overwhelm, that the adult can kind of help, you're safe, I see you,
Yes.
this will be okay, you'll get through
Yes.
this. And that then over time, the child can contain their own emotions. That idea of containment always kind of resonated with me.
Yes. And the parent is the container and the contained, if that makes sense. And Alicia Lieberman would talk about that as well, because the container has to contain the state of the young toddler, but it also has to stay contained itself. And that's not easy as a parent. And, to be a parent is probably is the most important thing that a person will ever do in their lifetime. And parenting a toddler is exhilarating too, but it's also challenging. It really is a challenging period of development, because the world is so exciting for the toddler, and managing this period of excitement can be difficult. And I think that, we talk about that good enough parenting is, first of all, important for parents to keep that in mind. But secondly, that in this period of development, parents may often be faced with their own emotional regulation. So there will be challenges during the toddler stage of development. And what I suppose we encourage parents to be just mindful of that own state in themselves. So to take time to calm, take a breath, pause, seek out help if your partner or extended family, if this is sometimes difficult. But what we're really asking parents is just to be aware of their own emotional states, and particularly when they have to help to regulate their baby, their toddler, their young child states, because the young child is looking to the parent for an understanding of what they're thinking and feeling. Facial expressions, tone of voice, really important sensory experiences that infants and toddlers and young children pick up a lot. And in many ways, we talk about the role of the parental face. It mirrors so much of what's happening at an emotional level. So I think if we can use facial expression, tone of voice, and just a calmer state, it really does help that co-regulation experience that the toddler is having, particularly in those very fussy moments.
And I suppose that comes back to the it takes a village, that sometimes the village is for the adult, be it the parent or the educator, that that the adults in this need their support, and like you say, their containment as well.
Yes.
So, as you move into the preschool stage and children move maybe from that idea that Sharon Byrne talked in the previous episode of, from kind of co-regulation to self-regulation, what tips or ideas or concepts would you think that educators and parents need to be aware of and implement in settings? There maybe, for some children starting maybe the ECCE stage could be their first introduction if they've maybe been in a home situation, be it the home or a childminder's. This could be their first introduction to being in a group of children when they're maybe just under 3?
Yeah, I suppose there's lots happening there. I suppose the same, I think, principles around the predictable, consistent caregiving environments are important, because in this period of development, the attachment security is still a work in progress. So we want a secure base to working on the whole area of developing a secure base, coming from that predictable, good enough working environment from the home right into the preschool. So I think that transition to the preschool can take time, and how the toddler is prepared is, I suppose, is really important. So that part of the parent establishing the relationship with the caregiving environment, preparation for the toddler, discussions around the change, visits to the school, visit to the preschool, short, brief periods there, and a sufficient amount of time to allow the toddler to engage with the preschool. Very often, I suppose, toddlers have had an experience maybe of sleepovers with relatives, and it isn't the first separation. But remembering still that, you know, particularly if it's a young toddler, that those early fears about insecurity can still be there, and it's not surprising then that you'll have fussy states at the door, and a lot of regulation. And I think just remembering then for the preschooler, or for the caregiving environment in the preschool, I suppose that understanding of emotional regulation, just that it's such a developmental task that it needs co-regulation of the caregiver, that when there are fussy moments, there will be a need for significant soothing by the caregiving environment. And I suppose we probably don't say enough about that understanding of the age at which co-regulation takes place, that 3.5 to 4. So the need for the caregiving environment to understand the emotional needs of the toddler, and the emotional needs of having also to be a co-regulator. I think as well that preparation, getting down to eye level, eye contact, talking and taking a toddler through every transition is important. Again, giving language to separation, parents maybe not wanting to say too much to distress the toddler, but I think it's really important to explain a separation is going to take place, but to say, Mummy's going to miss you, Dad's going to miss you, we look forward to seeing you at 12, we will be back. That kind of warm and toned language to let them know that they're going to hold them in mind. And that holding in mind, that what we often call reflective functioning, the reflective functioning, that capacity of the parent and also the caregiving environment to be able to understand their own emotional states, but then as a consequence of that, to be able to tap into the emotional state of the baby, the toddler. So that explanation, providing explanations, explaining that you will be held in mind, that you will be thought about, and maybe the caregiving environment also saying, Mummy's thinking of you, Mummy will be back at 12. So providing reassurance at transitions, and I think giving language to reassurance, providing language to give reassurance as well.
And sometimes even I hadn't heard of the term transitional object years ago when I set up my own setting, but I vividly remember, and this is a young man now, but he was very upset at the idea of his mammy leaving. He didn't want her to go, and she very astutely took off a bracelet and gave it to him and said, will you mind this for me until I come back for you? And it was nearly like he knew she'd come back for the bracelet, even if she didn't come back for him. And when I heard the term transitional object afterwards, it was kind of one of those light bulb moments for me. And I was kind of saying, that's exactly what she was doing. It was an intuitive thing with her, was, if I give him something of mine, it will give him that security. And, and whatever age, I think that can be a very useful thing. And, we understand the difficulties that maybe toys from home can create, but understanding the importance that they play in helping a child settle or transition even from one room to the other. helps us to maybe see those things in a different light, that they're helping the child to, move from one world to another.
I think that's wonderful example of holding the parent in mind, and it's a wonderful example of, it's like building a reflective self in the child as well, because when you provide a transitional object, or when a child has a transitional object, be a blanket or a piece of material or a bracelet or something belonging to the parent, or their closest caregiver, it really is and it's an opportunity to hold the parent's mind in their mind, and that really is that first beginning for the toddler of developing a reflective self, as again what Alicia Lieberman talks about in the toddler stage of development. And I think that then becomes almost like an internal soothing moment for the for the toddler, and it's really, really important. And practically, I suppose most children today will have something that they can take, but very often if it's a piece of clothing or something that can endear a sensory experience, all the better, because this pre-verbal period that still is only beginning to develop language works so much of the sensory experience of smell, of touch, of facial expression, of voice, of taste, all of those materials really being so important and so soothing. Really beautiful example.
Yeah, as I say, goes back a long time, but has stayed with me as kind of one of those key moments. So just before, as we start to wrap up, we've touched a bit on transitions, kind of maybe into the setting, supporting parents with the introduction. Children in creches, in full daycare, have many transitions. There are transitions within the day, but also transitions from room to room. And sometimes those transitions to an adult mightn't seem to happen that often, as in the transition maybe from a baby room to a wobbler room, and then to a toddler room, and then to a preschool room. What are your thoughts on, supporting those transitions, maybe minimizing those transitions? Have you thoughts on how the use of transitions, how effective transitions can be in supporting infant and toddler mental health?
Yeah, I think, again, because the relationship with the caregiving environment is such a pivotal area, I think it really, one of the things I suppose to consider in transitions is, will the same, how long has the baby or the toddler been with that caregiver, and is that caregiver going to follow into another room, or is it going to be a different part of the same room, perhaps, where the transition is taking place? So if it's going to be a change of caregiver, I mean, what we're trying to do is to get periods, consistent periods with the same caregiver while in each of the rooms. But of course, if the rooms are changing according to ages, then a new caregiver will be introduced. So again, with changes in transitions, I think preparation is important, and I think transitions which involve getting to know a new caregiver will mean preparation for the toddler, may mean that the caregiver in that room coming into the other room to get familiarity, and short periods of time with them, and building up time until such time as they're comfortable. I think also the use of play can also be a way of managing transitions, or managing change, and of course children are in that symbolic period of play. It may be a way also of supporting the transition.
Great, Catherine. That's, I personally, I love the idea of staff transitioning with children, or even adapting the environment to suit the age of the child, rather than moving the children onto a different room. And play is always the kind of the key way of managing an awful lot of these situations that arise. So, Catherine, thank you so much. There's so many gems of wisdom there in what we covered. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and thank you so much.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much, Maura. Thank you.
And thank you for listening to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word, and we look forward to talking to you next time.